Hey, what is up guys, MurgaMan4 here, and with Season 20, we have officially passed the halfway point of the collection. I must confess, it's been a long time since I've watched most of this season, with some stories approaching a decade, the longest I've ever gone without a rewatch. Not because I was avoiding them per se, though I've never been Season 20's biggest fan, but mainly because Season 20 had been rumored for ages, so I kept expecting a rewatch to be right around the corner. But it is finally here, so let's dive in and see if the time away can help me see Season 20 in a new light. Celebrating the show's 20th anniversary, Peter Davison's second season in the role took on a fun, if admittedly coincidental, approach. Every story would feature some returning character or villain from the show's past. Omega returned for a rematch, the previous year's Kindo was given a sequel, the threat of the Black Guardian was finally followed up on, the Master continued his fiendish schemes, and to top it off, every era of the show was brought together in a special feature-length episode. It's a lot to take in, but let's start with the trip to Amsterdam, an Arc of Infinity. Kicking off the season, Arc of Infinity promises much. A return to Gallifrey and a rematch with an old foe, the reappearance of a recently departed companion, and even the excitement of some international filming. It's a shame then that the whole thing is just so forgettable. Seriously, I could barely tell you more about it now than I could before my rewatch, and I hadn't seen it in 8 years. Okay, why don't we tackle it piece by piece? Firstly, Gallifrey. I'm not a Gallifrey hater by any means, but this is easily its least interesting appearance. By this point, the Time Lords have well and truly lost any sense of mystique. I simply can't bring myself to be invested in the High Council or even the mystery of who's working with Omega. Omega himself isn't bad, but boy is he generic, and significantly less interesting than his prior appearance. To his credit, Ian Collier gives an engaging performance, and I do like the concept of Omega trying to take the Doctor's form, and the subsequent chase through Amsterdam, even if I think that aspect is severely underutilized. Amsterdam itself does add some flavor to the story, but it's less a saving grace and more a curiosity. There's nothing in this story that needs or is enhanced by Amsterdam specifically in the way that Paris is used in City of Death, for example. Also of note is Tegan's return to the TARDIS crew, having been left behind at Heathrow at the end of the last story. It's an interesting approach to take. A companion rejoining the TARDIS after having a proper exit is a rarity, and certainly something with dramatic potential, which, again, this story doesn't particularly take advantage of. As it stands, it's just kind of awkward to have Tegan be left behind in the previous story, only to immediately, from the viewer's perspective at least, be reunited with the Doctor and Nyssa. And I can't help but think that this plot thread could have been far more effective if it had been saved for later in the season. Anyway, I suppose that's Arc of Infinity, summed up by wasted potential. It's not getting anything higher than a 6 out of 10 from me. I don't really know what to make of Snakedance. From what I've seen, it's held in fairly high regard, and I absolutely adore Kinda, one of my all-time favorite stories. And yet, Snakedance leaves me feeling hollow. Most of the things I like about it are simply retreading ground from its precursor, and not done nearly as effectively, and most of the new stuff, with the Menusan culture and the crystal, leaves me slightly baffled and certainly not engaged enough to just go along with the ride. One thing I will credit Snakedance with, though, is performances. It's a great guest cast that's effortlessly entertaining to watch, from Martin Clunes to Brian Miller to John Carson, who expertly deliver the humor, wit, and drama that the script demands of them. Unfortunately, that's really all I have to say. I had hoped a rewatch would change my mind, but alas, it remains an underwhelming experience for me, so I'll be sticking with a 6.5 out of 10 for Snakedance. Now we're talking. Mawdryn Undead is a non-stop thrill ride, built around a number of fascinating concepts and deviations from Doctor Who's expected formula. We've got a fun twist on the consequences of time travel that even today Doctor Who has only rarely explored, a story that hinges itself on the Doctor's regenerative abilities and more specifically their limits, a new companion with a totally unique motivation and conflict. Mawdryn Undead feels fresh and bold and unafraid to try new things and push boundaries. So let's look at each of these aspects one by one. Firstly, the time travel. Obviously, it's not too unusual to see multiple time periods within a single story, but it is rare for a story to be in two times at once, with the Doctor separated from Tegan and Nyssa by a number of years, and even rarer still, for a story to focus on a single character at two different points in their life, again, at the same time. I can think of very few outside of Time Lords interacting with other incarnations. Secondly, regeneration. It's the kind of thing that crops up every once in a while, but is typically only the focus in proper regeneration stories. And even still, there are a few stories that become fundamentally different when the regeneration aspect is removed. But here, we explore a group of beings who tried to steal regeneration for themselves, and ended up with more life than they bargained for. It's a great motivation for a villain. Not someone seeking to destroy or control, but seeking mercy, even if they're willing to get their hands dirty to achieve it. And I love how specific this threat is to the Doctor, with the solution hinging on the Doctor sacrificing his remaining regenerations. It's a brilliant usage of Doctor Who lore to create drama and tension. Finally, we need to talk about Turlough. I absolutely love how the story plays around with the traditional companion role by making Turlough a secret antagonist, albeit an unwilling one. Having someone infiltrate the TARDIS with a mission to kill the Doctor, only to realize the Doctor's actually quite a decent chap and form a genuine friendship with him, makes for a totally unique relationship rich with drama. Will the Doctor find out about Turlough's intentions? How will Turlough deal with the moral quandary he's been put in? I don't think later stories take full advantage of this idea, but Mawdryn Undead is a superb introduction to it, and to this day, Turlough's introduction remains one of the most unique and fascinating in the show's history. So I think it's safe to say I'm a fan of Mawdryn Undead. I've always enjoyed it, but I don't think I realized before now just how much great stuff's in there. So, it's going to be an easy 8 out of 10 from me. Well, sorry to say, but Terminus fails to continue the hype. It's doubly disappointing since Steve Gallagher's previous story, Warrior's Gate, is a favorite of mine. The thing about Terminus is, it's not bad per se, it's just dull. Like much of this season, it's not lacking in good ideas. I love the central concept of the Terminus station being at the exact center of the universe, alongside the revelation that the station dumping unstable fuel through time had in fact been the catalyst for the universe's creation. There's also a lot of potential in the Lazars, both in terms of the horror to be drawn from being trapped amongst the contagious and terminally ill, and the empathy required to overcome the fear of contamination to help such people. Unfortunately, also like much of this season, these ideas remain mostly as potential, failing to capitalize on the interesting bits and instead bogging us down with the politics of the station's guards. We also have the rather unnecessary inclusion of a monster in the form of the Garm, a creature which I think it's fair to say doesn't come off nearly as intimidating as the scriptwriter intended. It really is just a whole lot of meh. Perhaps the only standout aspect of the story comes in the form of Nyssa's departure, which actually took me a bit off guard. I feel like it's one that's often overlooked, and while it's not up there with the greats, it's a surprisingly mature and contemplative exit for a character that received little development on screen. I also appreciate how it's a departure that not only makes use of Nyssa's empathy, but also her skill set. While it does come a bit out of nowhere, it makes sense, and for an era that was often very afraid to have physical contact between the series regulars, I love that she leaves the Doctor with a kiss and Tegan with a tearful hug. It just feels very fitting somehow. So, yeah, Terminus is a mostly unremarkable tale that certainly gets points for a powerful companion exit, but otherwise, it just kind of exists. So for that, I'll be giving it a 6 out of 10. Well, things have been rocky so far, but Enlightenment immediately proves to be a breath of fresh air. Starting out with a gorgeously lit TARDIS set, the likes of which we pretty much never see in Classic Who, it's immediately apparent that we're in for something special. What I like so much about Enlightenment is that it's not afraid to be different. It's filled with grand ideas and striking imagery which, if nothing else, will make sure it's a story that you remember. I love the idea of the ships in space. It's just such a fun concept with such beautiful imagery. I also think the Eternals are a brilliant concept. Creatures that live forever, searching for ways to mitigate the boredom of eternity, using mortals to create entertainment with minds so vast that they fail to actually grasp the things that make life worth living. This idea is really well represented with Mariner, who for the first time begins to fall in love upon meeting Tegan, but who fundamentally misunderstands what love means. The concept also provides a springboard for what is, in my opinion, a strong contender for Peter Davison's best performance as the Doctor, as he confronts Stryker about the Eternal's twisted views on the value of life. Speaking of performances, it would be impossible not to mention Linda Barron's marvelously fun but threatening turn as Captain Rack. It's a captivating performance that I would consider one of the best of the era. Beyond all this, Enlightenment also has the task of concluding the Black Guardian trilogy, which, while it may have faltered in the middle, I thought started strong and ends strong. The story really brings to the forefront Turlough's struggle, with the story going so far as to have him attempt suicide to free himself. But I love that when all is said and done, it's up to Turlough to decide everyone's fates, and he chooses to give up the opportunity of wealth and freedom to save the Doctor's life, ultimately winning the Enlightenment everyone so desperately sought. It's a brilliant culmination of the arc, and paired with such a strong story, Enlightenment is absolutely a success. It'll be getting an 8 out of 10 from me. I don't understand the point of this story. It's just such a big ball of nothing. I only just watched it and I already forget 90% of it. Why is the Master here? And why is he carrying out a plan that would be far better suited to the meddling monk? And perhaps a better question, what is this disguise and how does the Doctor not see through it right away? Then we've got Chameleon, a shape-changing robot that, like Turlough, begins sided with an enemy of the Doctor's but ultimately joins the TARDIS crew. It's a cool idea, but it is an unfortunate example of the production team far overextending themselves, evidenced by the fact that Chameleon disappears without mention in the following story. I suppose that's less a fault of the King's Demons, but still, I don't feel that this story really does enough of interest with Chameleon to justify his introduction here. Okay, despite all that, the King's Demons isn't awful, but I really struggle to think of any redeeming features, and it's a mercy that it's only 2 parts. Frankly, that's the only thing that's preventing me from putting it lower than 4 out of 10. A disappointing conclusion to the season. But we're not quite done yet. And here it is, the big 20th anniversary celebration. Doctors, companions, and foes galore in a feature-length special episode. Over the years, there have been many approaches to celebrating the show's legacy, and while I wouldn't say The Five Doctors is the most coherent, it's certainly up there in terms of fun. And really, that's what matters. This is the Doctor Who equivalent of smashing all your action figures together in the best way possible. I actually think that, despite the wealth of returning elements, most of them are very well utilized. There's a good balance between the 4 lead Doctors, with each having a solid share of the runtime, alongside companions of their own, a surprising rarity in multi-Doctor stories. Richard Herndl is a solid stand-in for the late William Hartnell, and I admire the attempt to include Tom Baker's Doctor in some form with the then unused shot of footage. I'm also a big fan of how the story twists expectations when it comes to the Master, now brought in to help the Doctor, and with the ultimate villain being someone we've not only met multiple times previously, but has been a frequent ally to the Doctor. Philip Latham puts in a great performance as the power-hungry Barusa, and his successfully obtaining immortality, though not of the kind he imagined, makes for a very satisfying conclusion. The story isn't quite without its naff bits. The Raston warrior robot hardly comes across as the most perfect killing machine ever devised, and just what is going on with that chessboard floor trap? But, on the whole, it's a hugely fun celebration of the show's first 20 years, so I'll be giving it an 8 out of 10. Season 20 really is the definition of a mixed bag for me. You've got some stories that I really like, and some stories that I really don't. And the truth is, I've just never vibed with the Peter Davison era. There's just something about it that feels bland to me. You get the occasional story that breaks through that, but by and large, you give me a 5th Doctor story, and more likely than not, my reaction will be, meh. And that's what I think of Season 20. It's a very mess season. It's got some good stories in there, but it's not the pervading image when I look at the season as a whole, and I think that's a real shame. But how does Season 20 compare to the other seasons released in the collection so far? Well, firstly, I'd rank the stories in Season 20 as follows. At the top is Mawdryn Undead, followed by The Five Doctors and Enlightenment, all with 8 out of 10s. Then a jump down to Snakedance with a 6.5 out of 10, Terminus and Arc of Infinity with 6 out of 10s, and finally The King's Demons with a 4 out of 10. Because The Five Doctors is technically a special, I'm not going to include it in the overall season average, which comes to 6.42 out of 10. All told, Season 20 comes in 10th out of 14 seasons so far, though it's still some way behind the season ahead of it. It also slightly decreases the average of the 80s to 6.88 out of 10, though it increases Peter Davison's average to 6.43, even if it isn't quite enough to boost him out of last place. Of Season 20's writers, Barbara Clegg's first and only contribution lands her at the top of the bunch in 11th place and with an 8 out of 10. Immediately following are Christopher Bailey, also with an 8, and Terrence Dicks with 7.83 out of 10. Jumping down to 21st, we have Steve Gallagher with a 7.25, then another jump down to Johnny Byrne in 33rd with a 6 out of 10. Finally, we have Peter Grimwade and Terrence Dudley in 35th and 36th place, with 4.75 and 4.67 out of 10, respectively. As producer, John Nathan Turner's average decreases to 6.88 out of 10, as does Eric Sayward's as script editor to 6.91. As for directors, Peter Moffat moves up slightly to 11th place with 7.7 out of 10, followed by Fiona Cumming in 24th with 6.67, Mary Ridge in 28th with a 6, Ron Jones in 30th with 5.9, and finally Tony Virgo in 34th, second from the bottom, with a 4 out of 10. Unfortunately, Season 20 doesn't fare well in either premieres or finales, with both Arc of Infinity and The King's Demons entering their respective lists third from the bottom, and lowering the averages to 6.89 and 6.64 out of 10 respectively. Unsurprisingly, this also results in no new entries to the top 10, while The King's Demons enters the bottom 10, 6th from the bottom. In the overall ranking, Mawdryn Undead places highest in 20th place, followed by The Five Doctors in 26th, Enlightenment in 28th, Snakedance in 59th, Terminus in 66th, Arc of Infinity in 69th, and finally The King's Demons in 75th. And that's my thoughts on Season 20. It's been quite some time since I'd seen most of this season, but I'm sorry to say that my overall outlook hasn't changed. As with Season 9, this is another season that I have very mixed feelings on, and where the lows often outnumbered the highs. There are a couple of stories I'm happy to revisit, and certainly there are a lot of good ideas and concepts at the core, even in most of the stories I don't care for. But by and large, it's gonna be a while before I watch most of it again. But that's just me. What are your thoughts on Season 20? Please let me know in the comments below. And with that, Mergaman 4 over and out, and I'll see you next time with my review of Season 15.